Welcome to Just Roots Make Your Own Chicken Stock and Veggie Broth Workshop. In this video, we'll learn the difference between broth, stock, and bone broth, and we'll demonstrate an easy and delicious veggie scrap broth recipe and hearty chicken stock recipe. To skip to the demonstrations, check out the video description. So, to be honest, I didn't really know the difference between broths and stocks before making this workshop, so I did some research. Colloquially, they're interchangeable terms, but in reality, they vary slightly based on the ingredients and the preparation. So, broth is a rich and flavorful cooking ingredient that's made from simmering a variety of meats and vegetables, or vegetables and spices in water. The key here is that the simmer time is about 30 minutes to 2 hours, so it's a shorter simmer time. And typically it's used in recipes when you want to enrich the flavors of your dish or side, although it's just delicious to sip on its own. So we'll be making a veggie scrap broth. Stock is made similar to broth, but includes simmering bones in addition to a variety of meats, vegetables, and spices in water. So these ingredients also simmer for a longer period of time to enhance the flavor. That's like a 4 to 6 hour range. I often just do 3 and I count that as a stock. And we're going to make a chicken wing stock today. This longer simmering time for stock results in a really full-bodied, richer flavor. So the longer you simmer it, the more flavorful it is when it's taking those vegetables and those bones and all the fat from the chicken in. So I really like to use stocks for making a stew. You can also use it as a base for like delicious skillet sauces or full-bodied gravies. Last is bone broth. So bone broth is a further evolution of broths and stocks, and it's made from the simmering of bones in addition to a variety of meats, vegetables, and spices in water. These ingredients simmer for the longest period of time to maximize the flavor derived from the cooking process. So that's 12 to 48 hours, which is a huge window. The longer simmering time creates a bone broth with a full-bodied flavor, and this important piece, this naturally occurring collagen protein. So collagen comes out with those longer simmer times. I really like to just drink bone broth as a warm and savory beverage. It's said to really help with digestion. When I make bone broth, I usually roast the bones in the oven with a little bit of olive oil, and then I add some tomato paste, and I'll also roast the vegetables first too. We're not going to get into a bone broth recipe today, but there are plenty online that you can check out. For our first demo, we're going to make chicken wing stock. So this is going to be a really rich and bold stock. We'll be using 5 to 6 pounds of chicken wings. Those are pretty cheap at the store. We'll reuse the meat as well. 3 stalks of celery, 3 medium carrots. I'm doing 4 small onions. You could do 2 medium onions. So that makes up our Mirepoix. I'm going to use about a tablespoon of black peppercorns, 1 to 2 bay leaves. We're going to use salt, but really not till the very end when you're ready to serve. I have a bowl to put my Mirepoix, or my cut veggies. 8 to 10 cups of water. Measuring spoons might be helpful for you if you don't want to eyeball it. A big, tall stock pot. The taller, the better. And then we're going to use a large strainer or ladle, and that's going to scoop off the fat. So let's start with rinsing our chicken. I always like to rinse my chicken. So we're using whole, raw chicken in this recipe, and that's really going to make a gelatinous stock. Really good for you. As I mentioned before, we're doing about 5 to 6 pounds. I'm just separating those from each other. And really, 8 to 10 cups should fill to the top, but really all you want to do is just hit the top surface of the chicken with water. Then I'm going to stick that pot on the stove. I'm going to bring it to a boil. And in the meantime, you can get all of your veggies cut up. So really big cuts is totally fine. And for a Mirepoix, you're going to want to do 2 times the amount of onion as carrots and celery. So 2 times onion, 1 part celery, 1 part carrot. Notice I'm not really paying a lot of attention to how I'm chopping. These are the aromatics. They're supposed to bring flavor. We're not going to be eating them. Make sure to save your ends. You can use those in a kitchen scrap broth, so that's what I'm doing too. When you're using things like celery, you can leave the leaves on. They have great flavor. And again, it's an aromatic. It's not for eating. Not that you can't eat the leaves. And I also save the ends of the celery for the next recipe we're going to demonstrate with the veggie scrap broth. Just a reminder, 2 times the amount of onion as the carrot and celery. You can also use the skins in veggie scrap broth if you'd like to, so you can hold on to those. And I'm just doing a thick dice. You can even leave them in quarters if you prefer. It doesn't really matter. So that's really all the veg prep you're gonna need. The Mirepoix is just so traditional and wonderful in a chicken soup. And you might notice we're not using any cruciferous vegetables or kind of stinkier vegetables. We want these nice, mild aromatics in our broth. Now your chicken should be coming to a boil, and you'll notice this kind of like scuzzy white foam coming off the top. You're gonna wanna remove that. So I use a spoon. You could also use, some kind of strainer. A spoon just fits into my pot a little bit better. But there you see a sieve working quite well to get that stuff out. And once you start seeing that yellow grease or fat coming to the top, you can also ladle some of that off. I usually leave quite a bit of it because I like a fatty broth. But if you're looking for something more lean, go ahead and take as much of that off as you'd like. Once you've done that initial skimming of the fat and the sort of foam, it's time to add in your mirepoix, so your vegetables. So I'm just going to dump those right in there. And instantly you're going to start to smell this wonderful aromatic stock. We're also going to add some of our black peppercorns, a teaspoon of those, some bay leaves, that's optional. And we're going to stir to incorporate it. Now it's important to know I leave this unsalted, and I don't salt it until I'm using it for another dish because you don't know what the recipe calls for. I'm going to cook this for 2 to 6 hours, depending how strong you want that. I think 3 hours makes the perfect stock, not too vegetably flavored, brings out the chicken flavor quite a bit. And we're done. And look at this gorgeous colored stock. So I'm going to strain it through a sieve. You can use cheesecloth if you'd like. That really helps get the fine particulate out, but I think a sieve works just fine. And this recipe ended up making me just over 3 quarts. So I'm using glass jars to store it just because that works well for me. Use whatever you have. You're going to let it cool before you stick it in the fridge. So let it come to about room temperature before you put it back in your fridge. And they should last for, I think, up to 3 days. You could also freeze them. Now, I have all this leftover chicken meat that I'm going to pick through and make chicken salad or even use in another chicken soup, like a lemony rice chicken soup. The key to knowing if you made this stock correctly, because it is made with so much fat and bones and meat, is the next morning after it's been refrigerated overnight, take a peek, take it out, and see if it's really gelatinous. So basically, my whole jar is solid. It's full of this amazing protein-rich broth. Hope you enjoy it. Next up, we're going to make our veggie scrap broth. To be honest, this was the best vegetable broth I've ever had. I made mine with seaweed and mushrooms and then some veggies and veggie scraps that I had from my CSA. I just want to point out that there is no formula for making veggie scrap broth. You use what you have, but you use mild tasting vegetables. That's a key. You're not going to throw in broccoli or cauliflower or cabbage unless you want a really stinky broth. I'm just using these nice aromatic light flavored vegetables. It's a great idea to take any veggie scraps you have, like the ends of squashes or carrot peels or onion skins, and freeze those so that when you're ready to make a new stock, you've got everything you need. So for my recipe, I used just 1 to 2 carrots because I had some leftover carrot from our chicken broth recipe or chicken stock. 2-ish celery sticks. You can use the ends as well. I used some leek ends, the leaves of leeks. I used some dried and fresh mushrooms. The shiitake mushrooms really hit. They were delicious. A couple cloves of garlic. I only had a little bit of fresh herbs, so I used some parsley along with the stems. And then I used a few pieces of kombu or seaweed, and some black peppercorns, some bay leaf, and some salt. I do salt this first. So you're going to start off by roughly chopping 1/2 of an onion. So any kind of onion will do. That wasn't on my ingredient list, but I love using onion. It's just almost a necessity in your stocks. I put in about 3 tablespoons to a large, heavy bottom pot. I added my onions and my chopped leek ends, only if you're using them. And I'm basically going to cook these for 10 to 15 minutes until they're translucent, starting to brown, and that's going to improve the flavor of the stock. Meanwhile, I got my carrots and my garlic and all of my other aromatics ready to go, so I could throw those in the pot and cook them as well. So we are sauteing our vegetables before adding them to the stock. And really use as much garlic as you'd like. I think I used 4 cloves. If you're a garlic person, use more. If you're not so much, use less. Use what you got. If you're using any herbs like parsley or basil, some fresh herbs, I would get those ready too. You can slice up your mushrooms. If you're using dried ones, I just throw them in whole. And now don't forget in between the time, so you don't burn it, to make sure to stir those alliums, your onions. And once it's wilty and looks like this, that means it's time to add your other vegetables. So it's wilty and the onion's translucent. And we're going to go ahead and stir those in really well, and we're going to get those caramelizing or cooking in our pot. Next, I'm going to add my dried mushrooms, if you're using those. We're going to add some fresh mushrooms. We're really just tossing it all in at this point and making sure everything has contact with the heat and the olive oil. Don't forget to keep stirring during this process. And look at those beautiful colors. Then I added my seaweed and my bay leaf. And I just kind of crunch them up into pieces because we're going to strain all of the vegetable matter away from the broth. And this makes a really delicious ramen broth. If you're using seaweed, if you're using shiitake mushrooms, I highly recommend it. I did about a 1/4 teaspoon of black peppercorns, threw in some of my fresh herbs, and now it's time to add our water. So I did 6 cups of water. You could do all the way up to 8 if you'd like. You just want to have those vegetables submerged. And here I am adding salt. I started with a teaspoon because that seaweed also has some salt. You're going to bring it to a boil and then move it to simmer, and you'll set a timer for 1 hour. Look at those beautiful colors. I just had to add a picture of it. Now it's time to strain. So I did the same thing as I did with our chicken stock. Just be careful. You want to wait till it's a little bit cooled. No cheesecloth needed. You're just going to strain it in there. The vegetables are going to get discarded unless you want to eat them. You certainly can. And what I'm doing here is I'm putting it into the sieve, and I'm going to use a spoon to gently press all that delicious liquid out of there. I want to get as much as possible. This recipe didn't yield as much as the chicken. I think I did about 1 1/2 quarts, or just over 1 1/2. And I wish I made so much more because it was delicious. I really like just sipping this, heating it up and sipping it. I have a cold if you can't tell. It's so medicinal and delicious and great for digestion. I hope you enjoy your veggie stock. Once you've had this, there's nothing like it. No store-bought veggie stock can compare. Now that we're done with our stock and our broth, I just want to look at them and compare a little bit. So the chicken stock is much more yellow. It has a larger layer of fat on there. You can scoop that off if you like. The broth is a lot more clear. It's darker colored from the vegetables being roasted. And look at all this chicken I have left. It's a lot of picking to do, but it's well worth it. Enjoy your broth. Let me know if you have any questions. You can email me at brooke@justroots.org. We'd be happy to share any recipes, and make sure to look at the video description. That's where you're going to find these exact recipes that I used. Thanks so much. Have a good one.